Hi guys, welcome to an introduction to Web Typography, a Touch Plus premium course. My name's Ian Yates and this first video is going to break you in nice and gently. It's going to be a bit of a talky, chatty one really. We're going to take a look at what web typography is and talk about why it's worth taking seriously. Let's quickly run down what we're going to cover in the next 10 minutes or so. Firstly, we're going to ask ourselves, what is web typography? We're going to take a look at some of the basics. We're going to discuss some of the ways in which we can influence type, and then we're going to talk about the assignments which we're going to be following throughout all these lessons. Then to finish off, I'll suggest some further reading. So let's begin with our question. What is web typography? Well, the answer is this. It's typography, which just happens to be viewed via a web browser of some sort. Typography is a discipline of graphic design which goes back centuries, and just because we're now looking at type by means of a different medium, that doesn't mean we're dealing with a whole new kettle of fish. Rules and conventions which have applied to typography through the ages are equally relevant now. There are technical considerations to bear in mind. These days we manipulate our type with graphics applications and programming languages such as CSS. There's the flexible aspect of a web page. Font sizes can change, line lengths grow and shrink, which means we have less fine control. And there are physical differences between the browser and print, such as the effect screen resolution and display method have on quality. They should be forgotten. Small lettering will not display quite so well on a screen as it does on the printed page. So there are differences in terms of the practicalities and limitations. However, we're talking about the graphic design concepts behind web typography, and these concepts are exactly the same as those behind the typography of yesteryear. What we should really therefore be asking ourselves is, what is typography? As Oliver Reichenstein puts it, typography is not about choosing fonts, it's about shaping text for optimal reading experience. There we have it. Ignore all your previous preconceptions about choosing pretty fonts. We're primarily concerned with communication, and that can involve all aspects of design: color, weight, distribution, space, unity. All of these players are involved, but you need to dismiss everything until you have your text fundamentally readable. We're not simply talking about styling letter types. We're looking at a much bigger picture. In designing our typography, we're going to be considering line length, paragraph spacing, alignment, entire page layouts, all aspects of design which you'll have to be familiar with. Text can perform a variety of roles. It can be decorative. Perhaps this one's an odd one out, as it might not necessarily need to be legible in this case. It can be attention grabbing, or it can be purely functional. In all cases, there are rules and guidelines to follow, and that's the nice thing about typography. It's a bit like using a grid on which you build a layout. You have your boundaries predefined, which allows you to concentrate on being creative. These days, with technology having made typography so accessible, many of the rules and conventions are forgotten, and this only results in a huge amount of poorly designed type swamping the web. Take on board these rules, they're there for a reason, and your designs will be all the better for them. Another question, why is web typography so important? Well, as we've discussed, typography is about making it clear for the reader which bits of content are most relevant to him or her. When you consider the sheer volume of content available on the web, and the fact that we instinctively scan information instead of reading it, it's easy to see how content can get lost within the noise. Ever since the dawn of the internet, we've seen exponentially increasing amounts of stuff published to the web, and that's just more and more stuff your content has to stand out from. Only relatively recently have we had the tools to control typography on the web. Proper layout methods, font choice, CSS3 typographic rules, so it's only very recently we've been able to do anything about it. Some would argue that a whole generation of designers has appeared without having any typographical understanding because the tools weren't there to help. Well, it's time to change that. These days we do have control over our web type, and we should take it seriously. So in what ways can we influence type? Well, fonts can be so varied in style it's difficult to know where to begin, but let's begin by playing with just one font. We'll start by placing some text on a page. Open up the accompanying source files to this video and you'll find a Photoshop document called Passage PSD. Here it is. We have a perfectly legible passage of text which says nothing in particular, and it's displayed at a default size of 30 pixels in Arial regular with default line height, or leading as it's properly known in the world of typesetting. What might we want to alter here? Well, we might want to bring emphasis to very little. We might want the introductory sentence to make a greater impact, an initial attention grabber. And we can do all this without altering the layout, without touching the color palette, just by using the basic typographic tools at our disposal. We'll italicize the very little, giving it emphasis. I'll grab my type tool there and select the text, and we'll select Arial Italic. It gives it emphasis, which is why web browsers display the contents within an EM tag, or an emphasis tag, in italics by default. Now, to give even greater impact to the first sentence, let's alter the weight. So I'll select it and we'll choose Arial Bold. Let's even change the case and we'll make it uppercase. Now when we're dealing with uppercase lettering, it's often wise just to increase the kerning or the letter spacing to improve legibility. Now you'll notice that I used the bold face and the italic face instead of using the faux bold and the faux italic from Photoshop. What I've used has been specifically designed. Graphics applications and browsers don't tend to render padded and oblique versions 100% true to the intended font. So there we are. That's it. It's actually quite beautiful in its own simplistic way. Straightforward stuff, you might think. But what we're doing here is fundamental typography. We've altered the visual hierarchy, dictated which content is most important and which is more passive. And we've done it without even playing with different fonts or even variants of the same font. We've used weight, italics and case. Nothing more. Okay, we've played quickly with an example document, and that's something I need you to get used to. In each of these screencasts, I'm going to be providing source files for you to use while you follow along. With each of these files, we'll be practicing the various principles I talk about. Each one is going to teach you something fundamental which you can take away and apply directly to your own work. So, go and grab the first source file, think about which parts of the text are important, and think about how you can communicate that typographically without using different typefaces. Something else I'd like you to get used to is further reading. At the end of these videos, I'll be suggesting books and articles on the web which will further reinforce whatever we've been talking about. One thing you'll notice is the age of a lot of these examples. I'll be pointing you towards some pretty old articles. Well, anything over 5 years is old in internet terms, and this only goes to reinforce what I've said about the principles of typography. They've been around for a long time. Worthy articles from a decade ago are just as worthy today, because in spite of changing technologies, the concepts remain the same. This time I'd like you to take a look at Oliver Reichenstein's article in response to a previous article he'd written on common mistakes and attitudes in web typography. Then there's webtypography.net, which is a solid technical resource and it covers every aspect of web typographic theory. Lastly, this article by Vasily Vasinov on the importance of web typography covers a number of sins which designers often fall foul to. Next time on an introduction to web typography, we're going to take a look at the anatomy of web type. This is Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks for watching.